Ratios and proportion. So in this topic, we're going to see ratios and proportions. Copy the title. Okay, definitions. Remember, the SAT doesn't really care about the definitions, which means they're not going to ask you, hey, what is a ratio, what is a proportion? But it's good that you know the definitions so we can work when I explain the solutions, we can work in the same terms. So a ratio is just basically the division of two numbers. That's it. Now, how do we represent this? Usually we represent it as a fraction or using two, like the word two, which means when I say the ratio of men to women, and I say, how do I find the ratio of men to women? Well, I typically just divide the number of men over the number of women, and that's it. That gives you my ratio. The proportion is the equation formed by two ratios. So let's say A over B is the ratio of men and women on the men to women on school A, and this is school X, and this is school Y. Now a proportion will be like the making them equivalent or making the ratios to be the same. Now, it's important to notice that a proportion doesn't necessarily imply that the number of exact people is going to be the same, which means that doesn't mean that the number of men in school A is equal to the number of men in school B. It just means that when you divide the number of men and women, it's going to give you the same numbers for both schools. Okay, pause the video, copy this. We're going to continue. We're going to go to as many as. So this is very, very, very important. When we have that something or that this expression that is x times as many a as b, we usually write this as a is equal x times b. So, in an example, we have in a meeting, there are twice as many males as females. Usually, intuitively, we may think that the correct way to write it down is like this. So, I have twice as many males as females. Okay, so the number of males or two times the number of males is the number of females, but this is incorrect. The correct way to note this is like this. M is equal to F. I'm going to explain it using natural language. Let's say I have brothers and I have sisters. Okay, now let's say I already know the number of brothers, so I say I have four brothers and I have two sisters. Okay, now listen to my words. I have twice as many brothers as I have sisters. Well, yes, I have brothers twice as many, four, as I have sisters, two. If you listen to my words, when I use this for natural language, it kind of makes sense. The thing is, like when we translate this to math, sometimes it creates a little bit of a discrepancy because that's not the way we usually write on math questions, and the SAT uses this to confuse students. So when they say, in a meeting, there are twice as many males as females, is like saying, I have twice as many brothers as sisters, or in my classroom, there are twice as many males as females, and you have to write it down like this. Okay, pause the video, copy what you have to copy, and we are going to move on to the rule of three. If you already know the rule of three, that whatever you know, this is what we apply. If you don't know, I'm going to explain. Okay, we're going to start with directly proportional rule of three. Let's say I have a job, like I have a company, and there are people who work in a company, and let's say I'm comparing the number of hours with the number of items that they produce. So let's say in my company, in 1 hour, we produce three items because they are big items, not because my company sucks, right? So if I produce three items in 1 hour, then how many items I'm going to produce in 4 hours? Well, in order to solve this, you can use the formula for the rule of three, which is right here for the directly proportional rule of three, which is right here. You can pause it and copy. Why is it called directly proportional? Because when the number of hours increases, the number of items also increases. So they both increase, they are directly proportional. Now, in addition to using the rule of three, which means in this case will be x will be 3 times 4 divided by 1, so x will be 12. This is according to my rule of three. I can also use the proportions, which means I don't really have to use rule of three. If I use my reasoning skills, I know that if in 1 hour they produce three items, then in 4 hours all I have to do is multiply times 4 here and multiply times 4 here, because they're going to keep being proportional. Proportional, as we saw in the definition, means that they're going to keep the same proportion. When we divide, they have to keep the same number. So instead of doing my rule of three, all I have to do is find the proportionality, multiply times 4, and this also gives me the answer. Okay, pause the video here, copy what you had to copy, and I'm going to explain the inversely proportional. Okay, I'm going to erase. And now we're going to see the next case, the case in which something is inversely proportional, which means, again, directly proportional means when one increases, the other one increases. So inversely proportional means that one increases, the other one decreases. How does this happen? Well, let's say this is the number of people working in a job, and this is the number of hours that that job takes. So let's say that one person takes 3 hours to build a wall, right? Or to paint a wall, not to build it, but to paint it. Then how many hours are two people going to take? So in this case, the number of people is going to increase, but the number of hours is not going to increase, it's going to decrease, but more, because more people doing something is going to make the task take less time. Ideally, in math, in real life, may not. But so here what we do is we use the inversely proportional equation, which is right here. So instead of cross multiplying, we multiply across the line. So we have a times b, so x will be 1 times 3 divided by 2. So it's 3 divided by 2, which is 1.5. But I can also use my super reasonable logical skills and say, hey, but I still have a proportion. It's not a direct proportion, but still a proportion, which means if one increases, the other one decreases. If in one I'm multiplying times 2, then in the other one I have to divide by 2. So x is 3 divided by 2, which is 1.5, which is the answer, which means I can reach the answer either using the formula for rule 3 or just using proportionality. Pause the video, copy. Even if you think you know, I want you to copy, and we're going to move on. Okay, now we're going to do these two examples. I want you to pause the video, solve these questions, write down the answers, and I'm going to solve them. Okay, we're going to do question number 1. Question number 1, it goes like this. If y equals kx, where k is a constant, and y equals 27 when x is 18, what is the value of y when x equals 30? First, we're going to solve it as a regular equation. So I have this, y equals kx, and I'm going to replace y is 27, so I have 27, and then x is 18, I replace here, right? So 27 is equal to k times 18, so I'm going to find k. So k is going to be equal to 27 divided by 18. I can do this in my calculator, so k is equal to 1.5. What do I do with this? I go back and replace in the equation. So when x is 30, y is going to be equal 1.5 times 30, which is going to be 45, which is the answer. Okay, can I do this in another way? Yeah, actually, there's another way of doing it, which is just find the proportions. How do I do it? Pause the video, copy this, and I'm going to do it in the other way, which is pretty much the same, by the way. So how do we find the proportion? Well, the k over here just means that there's a proportion between x and y. So I'm going to kind of use the rule 3, but without really using the rule of 3. So I have the values of x and the values of y. So when x is 18, y is 27, right? So when x is 30, what is the value of y? I'm going to put y, right? So what I do is I can just do my rule of 3. Since I know this is directly proportional, I can just do 30 times 27 divided by 18, which will give me the answer. Or I can find the proportion. The proportion is going to be a little bit not so smooth because it's not going to give me a whole number, but I can also just find the proportion. What do I multiply times 18? So I can get 30, and that is 30 divided by 18. And I pretty much do the same thing for the 27, and you can use your calculator, it will give me the same answer. Okay, let's do question number 2. If 28 pennies weigh 42 grams, what is the weight in grams of 50 pennies? I can totally just use my rule of 3 for this one. So I'm going to have pennies, like number of pennies, and grams, right? So number of pennies and grams. So I have 28 pennies weigh 42 grams. So 50 pennies, how much? So what I do is I cross multiply. So x is going to be 50 times 42 divided by 28. I plug this into my calculator and I get the answer, which is 75. This is the answer. Copy if you have to copy. These are the answers. You can see the answers here. And we're going to move on to variation, which is another topic inside ratios and proportions in DSAT. which is variations of expressions. So usually variations of expressions happens when they tell you that a shape is increasing or decreasing. Is usually a geometrical shape, but not always. And you have to know by what percent it increased, what percent it decreased. Maybe it's not about percent, maybe it's just twice as much or 2.5 times, etc. Pause the video right now, copy everything you see here, and we're going to move on. Okay. So we're going to focus on the value that changes, pay attention to exponents and roots. I'm going to explain this. They will most likely use geometric formulas. You don't really have to memorize the complicated geometric formulas, but you have to know the basics, like the area of a square, the area of a triangle. And you have to remember that linear measures are meters, areas are meter squares, and volumes are cubic meters. Okay, we are going to do the first example. The example, I'm going to want you to pause the video, solve the question, and we're going to check it. Okay, so we have the radius of a circle is increased by 25%. So we have a circle. A circle has a radius. We have to know the area of the circle. So we have to know the formula for the area of the circle. So the formula of the area of the circle is pi times radius squared. So now I have this original radius, and then it's increased, and I have another circle with another radius. The radius is going to be 125% of the previous radius. And then the question is, by what percent does the area of the circle increase? So what I have to do is I have to find the area of the first circle and the area of the second circle and find what is the increase, the percent increase. So the first circle will be pi r squared, and the second circle will be pi r squared. But in this case, the r is no longer just an r, is 125% of the r. So what do I do now? I have to just find the answers, find the areas, and I have to subtract, because the question is asking me to by what percent is it increasing. So it's about increase. So here in the first circle, I don't do anything because this is just pi r square. So sorry, I forgot about the square. So this is the second circle in which I have to do something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find this increase. So I have pi times 125% of r to square. So what I do is I do 125 square, which is going to give me 15,625. And then it's also the percent square. I know this sounds like a lot of r square, right? And this minus this. Basically, the question is, what is this minus this? I'm going to try to put it here. I don't have more space, but I'm going to put it here. Now, the percent you have to remember is over 100. I could have done this at the beginning, but I just let it go. So what I'm going to do is like this big number I have here, 55652, and the percent is also square. So it's like 1 over 100 times 1 over 100, which means I have this big number over 100 times 100. So it means I'm cutting 1, 2, 3, 4 decimal spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, which means this new area, okay, is 1.5625 of the previous area. So when I subtract this new area minus the previous area, I get just the 0.5625, which is equivalent to 56.25%. So the answer will be 56.25%. Okay, copy if you have to copy. We're going to do the next one. Pause the video right here, and I want you to solve this question over here. Write down the answer, and we're going to solve it. Okay, same thing or similar thing. The length of a rectangle is increased by 20% and the width is decreased by 20%. We're going to start by drawing the rectangle, right? So we have a rectangle that has a length and a width, right? And then we have a new rectangle that has a new length, which is increased by 20%. So I have 120% of L, and a new width, which is decreased by 20%. So I have 80% of width. If you want to work with decimals, you can work with decimals. So I'm going to translate this to a decimal. So now this will be 1.2L, and this will be 0.LW. So the question is the change in the area. So the area of the first rectangle is just length times width, so W times L. And the change and the area of the new rectangle will be 1.2L times 0.8W. But if we put the W and the L together, we end up just having to multiply 1.2 times 0.8, which gives us 0.96 LW. So the new rectangle is 0.96 LW, which means I have gone down 0.04%, which means I have decreased by 4%. Now, at the beginning of this specific topic, the variation topic, I told you to focus on the value that changes, which means the W and the L are always going to be present, W and the L. We don't really care about W and L. We just care about the values that are going to change. And this is what it means to focus on the values that change. Pause the video, copy if you have to copy. These are the answers. And we're gonna do some application questions from the real SAT. I want you to pause the video and solve this question over here and write down the answer. This is basically just rule of three. I'm gonna explain it. So it says, a printer produces poster at a constant rate of 42 posters per minute. So we have number of posters, right? And minutes. So 42 posters in 1 minute. The question is, at what rate in posters per hour does the printer produce a poster? Well, so instead of minutes, I have hours, but how many minutes are in 1 hour? So in 1 hour we have 60 minutes. So how many posters do you create in 60 minutes? Again, you can use your rule of three, or you can just say multiply times 60 here and multiply times 60 here. You put this in your calculator and you get the answer to be 2,520. Okay, I'm going to go to the next one. Okay, pause the video, solve this question, write down your answer. And this is the variation question. This is from the digital SAT. Okay, circle A has a radius of 3n and circle B has a radius of 129n. When n is a positive constant, the area of circle B is how many times, so we need the proportion, the area of circle A. So we're going to write, in this case, draw the circles, right? We have circle A and we have circle B. So circle A has a radius of 3n and circle B has a radius of 129n. And then what we do is we find the areas. This is important that we find the areas and don't just divide the radius, right? The radii. We actually have to find the area. So the area is pi r square, right? So we have, in this case, the r is 3n, so we have pi times 3n square, and in this case, the radius is 129n, so it's pi times 129n square. Since we're just focusing on what changes, we don't really care that much about the n square or the pi. We're going to focus on the 129 and the 3. So 3 square is 9, and 129 square is 641. So basically what they're asking us is, what is the ratio between 641 and 9? So all I have to do is divide this number by 9, put this in my calculator, and that gives me letter D, 1849. Okay, we're going to go to the last question. This is the last question. I want you to pause the video, copy this question, solve it, write down the answer, and we're going to check. Okay, so you say, Tilly earns P dollars for every W hours of work. Okay, so we have hours of money and hours of work. So P dollars every W hours of work. Which expression represents the amount of money in dollars Tilly earns for 39 W hours of work? So W hours of work gives you 20 P dollars. So 39 W hours of work gives you what? And here you can use your rule of three, but you can use just a simple proportion. So what do I do to W to get to 39W? I multiply times 39. So what do I do to P to get to X? I multiply times 39, giving me 39P, which will be the answer, letter A. Okay, here you can see the answers. And this is it for ratios and proportions. If you want to practice more, these are the pages of the books that you can practice on. Remember, you can just practice with Khan Academy or just go right into your practice test. And see you in the next video.